Well, hello. It's so great that you're here to join me today in the Fire Mountain Gems and Beads Jewelry Making Studio. I'm Lisa Pavelka, and today is about clay, metal clay. So some of you might have never thought about trying to work with it because you think it's expensive or that it takes a lot of tools and equipment to work with, and that's not necessarily the case. We're going to demystify art clay silver and show you an easy way to work with it to make a lovely kinetic pendant, a heart within a heart, or here's my heart. So we're starting with a 20-gram package of art clay silver. This fires with a torch. You don't need an expensive kiln. And 20 grams is actually enough to make two of the projects I'm doing here today. You probably will even have a little bit left over. Maybe I'll throw in a tip or a hint of what you can do with that when you're done. But we don't want to open the package until we're ready to work with it. It air dries. Unlike polymer clay, which we can walk away from for hours, days, and even months, we don't want to open the package until we're ready to handle it. You also want to be sure that you have all the tools and equipment you need on hand to do your project, because seconds matter. Don't let that intimidate you. I'm here to give you some of my favorite tips and tricks to make sure that you can keep your clay workable and not have to rush through your project. So we're going to open our package and take it out, and you see it's sealed a couple of different times, and that's to keep the air off of it. And I'm going to show you the best way to open it so that you don't get a lot of extra clay stuck to the cellophane. Now, of course, we would save all those scraps and put them away because there's so many things you can do with dried out or scrapped art clay silver, just like you would with polymer. So there's never any waste. But the best way is to find the seam where it folds over and maybe just peel it open from there like that. And then we've got a little bit of clay there. We can pick that up or save it for our scrap bin, but you'll get most of your clay out. Now, it likes to stick to your fingers, so it's best to handle it without touching it if possible. So I take a little bit of food wrap, or I actually like to cut a little heavier weight plastic, little zippy bag. So we're just going to squeeze it and condition it. There could be air trapped between these layers, so before we begin working with it, we want to go ahead and fold it over on itself a few times to make sure we can press out any air. And by handling it through the plastic, it prevents it from sticking to our fingers and we don't lose any of the metal by it drying on our hands. You can gently scrape the residue off when you do have to handle it, but the more of the clay we can keep, the better. So now we're working with the nested heart or the nested clay cutter set, and they come in all different sizes and shapes. And of course, you're going to want to take an old candy tin and decorate that to keep your cutters organized and neat. But I took the largest of the heart cutters and the smallest of the heart cutters within this set. And those are the two I've chosen to work with. We're going to need a few other cutting tools, but we'll get to that when it's the right time. When I work with a shape like that, I actually try to shape the metal clay in the plastic so that it rolls out the way I want it to. If I have a long snake, it's going to be hard to get it wide where I want the top of my heart to be. So let's take a look at what that might look like. And it's okay to handle it when you have to touch it. So I'm just going to reach in here in the plastic and I'm going to pinch it a little bit and flatten it. And I'm going to pull down this top and spread it. So see, it's starting to take on a triangular shape that's more in line with the heart that I want to do. Now, what you want to work on is Teflon sheeting, and this is a great material. I actually use it for a lot of other applications. And then you need some spacers to get a nice, smooth, even sheet of clay rolled out. Now these spacers come in all different thicknesses, and there's a chart that comes on each package. It tells you the millimeter thickness, the inch thickness, and how many playing cards thickness. So the easiest way for me to talk about these is that I have selected cards that are usually the 4th or 5 cards thick is what I like when I roll out something like this. We're going to be embossing with one of my texture stamps. So if we roll it too thin, there's the danger of it tearing through or the necklace being too flimsy after it's fired. So once we're ready, we also need to make sure we have our roller at hand. Now sometimes tools can stick to the metal clay, and a great release agent that I love is the Slick Baby. Now you can handle it directly with your fingertips, and it's actually a nice conditioner for your cuticles. But I like to use just an inexpensive cosmetic sponge that you can get at any drugstore. And I will do a light coating. You don't want it too goopy. If it's a little goopy, go ahead in there with your hands and just wipe some of it off. And you can condition all your tools, even the edges of your cutters. And sometimes I just put a little light coating even on the nonstick Teflon. That makes it just a little bit less sticky. So we're going to open this up, and with all the tools we have at hand, we're going to pull that out. And don't worry, we can use all of that clay that's stuck there. Now sometimes it's really fresh and it might be a little too juicy, so you might let it sit out for a few seconds to dehydrate just a little bit. But I'm going to pick this up now and roll it out until I can't roll it out anymore. And you can see that 20 grams gives us quite a bit to work with here. And we're going to gently lift it off. And now we need our stamp, and I'm using my love letter stamp. So just a little light coating here with the Slick Baby so that it will release. We want to go ahead and remove the slats. We don't need those in place anymore. And we're going to, actually I like to pick this up and lay it down right over the top. You do it whichever way you like. And I like to just give a light fingertip pressing, or you can go through your Teflon paper and just burnish it. You can use your roller, but I find I get too deep of an impression. I want my letters to be just below the surface so they're crisp and clean. If I go too deep, then they're a little hard to make out that they're letters. Now occasionally I don't get the impression I like, so I'm going to have to start over. Should that happen, you want to fold it back up, recondition it in your plastic bag, but always put any embossing or texture on the outside as you fold so you don't trap air inside. So let's see how I did. And that's a little faint for me. So we're going to do that real quick, but I'm going to give you another quick tip here. So the letters on the outside, as I suggested, and then we're going to fold it flat a little bit more. If the clay begins to dry on you, if you feel like it's cracking and it's stiffening up, you need to rehydrate. Now some people like to spritz it with water. I don't have any control when I do that. So if you find it's dry, and this is actually still in pretty good shape, what you want to do is just add a small amount of water with the dab method. See how that soaks in there, and you can see that the clay is darkening? It's much easier to control and keep your clay the right consistency, folding the water in, and then just folding it in your plastic a few times to make sure that you evenly distribute that water. If I need more, I can continue to add more. The problem with spraying it is, if you add too much, you often end up with mud. So we're just going to condition this one more time and then start to shape it. So if you feel the need to handle the clay with your hands, you can also just reach in there and get a little of that Slick Baby on your fingers, and that helps keep it from sticking. So I think we're good again. So this time I'm going to use a little more pressure. So don't feel bad if you don't get the effect you want right away. Even though it's sensitive to drying, it doesn't dry that quick. They've improved the formula of Art Clay Silver, so it's got much more workability than it used to have. So if you used it earlier and you found it difficult to work with, it's a whole new clay. So we've got a nice sheet to work with once again. And let's go back out here and just hit our stamp one more time just to make sure we've got a nice slick surface. You don't want it goopy again. Now this time I actually am going to roll. So I'm going to turn this sideways, and I'm using very light pressure. But I can see through the roller that I'm hitting the lines on my stamp, and I like what I see, what's coming up here. Oh, I love it. That's just what I wanted. Okay, so right on back onto our Teflon sheeting, we have our cutters at hand, and you have to decide in your design, are you going to hang the heart from each corner at the top rounded part, or are you going to hang it from the middle? Do you want to hang it askew? I think I'm going to go for askew. It's almost as much fun to say that as it is to do it. So I'm even putting my cutter, the alignment askew. So we're going to press this down in place, and actually with that cutter still in place, I'm going to decide where I want to make my smaller heart. This is going to dangle outside of it. It's kind of like a puzzle piece, and it's just a really fun effect having it hang outside of there, so it's like you're always in my heart. So we're cutting these out. Occasionally, when you go to remove a cutter, your clay will stick inside of it. If it does, don't worry, just dehydrate it right inside the cutter and it will come out cleanly and without any distortion you might have if you try to poke it out. So now we're going to just wiggle this back and forth and lift up the excess clay. We want to save that as soon as possible, so gently fold it. We don't want to trap air in there. And the best way to save your excess clay is in a thinner food wrap so that you can compact it nice and tight and put a nice big twist on it. And then I like to keep it in a smaller zip bag with a piece of wet paper toweling. And actually, if I check this at least once a week, I might need to rehydrate it with a little more water using my dab method, but I can often keep my unused metal clay workable for several weeks when I do it this way. So just push out all the air with your fingers, set it aside, and it's ready for the next project. But back to this one. So I want to cut out a place to hang it from. And you can do a reinforced hole, or you can just do a hole by putting another layer and punching through it. I'm just going to do one single hole. That one single hole will be sturdy enough to hold it with a bail or a jump ring. So I'm actually going to go right in this corner here, and what I'm using is a coffee stirring straw. I cut it at an angle so I know which is the clean machine edge, and I want a short piece so that I can get out any excess clay in there, and we're going to want to save that. You would get that in your bag. Now I need two more holes, one in my heart to suspend the inside heart with, and another one outside to attach the jump ring that's going to hold the connecting chains. You can even do a dangle from the bottom if you wanted to hang a crystal or a charm from there too. Now sometimes with this heart, it might flip around being on a chain the way that we're going to hang it. You might want to decorate it from the back as well. And I'll show you what I did here. Here's a heart I've already dried. And I went ahead and I freestyled. I make little hearts using my hobby knife with this nice sharp tip. And I use some of my scraps. So that's a great way to use up your scrap clay, is to make little charms or accents. Maybe you aren't using them with this project, but then you can set them aside. They don't have to be fired until you're ready, and you might incorporate them in other things you do, like polymer clay. I love to mix the concept of different clays using them together. All right, so this dehydrates in the oven. You can also air dry it overnight. You can also use a hair dryer or heat tool, but be careful. If it gets too hot, you can prematurely dry out the binder, the cellulose binder that's in there, and it cause it to prematurely shrink before we're ready to fire. So an oven, 250 degrees or less, a food dehydrator, leaving it overnight, or with a heat tool or a hair dryer, we want to dehydrate it. So be sure to check back on my tips for dehydrating in the Fire Mountain Fix-Its, how to tell when your clay is completely dry. When your piece is dry, you're going to want to do a little refining. So we're going to move this out of the way. And I like to work on a rubber block, which gives me a little stability and control, especially for these inside areas. If you've never worked with metal clay before, you may not know it's got the tensile strength of like a potato chip or a saltine cracker. It can break very easy in this state, which is the greenware state. So I'm going to take some files, and I'm going to rough off any edges that are rough, and you can even do this after you fire. But it's easier to refine the metal clay in the greenware state than it is in the fired state. So you might actually even work over another piece of your Teflon paper and catch these little bits and pieces, because you can save them up and use them to create paste and all kinds of wonderful applications with your metal clay. So I'm just going to lightly go around here. It doesn't take much pressure, and see how I'm using the block to support it. Avoid holding it in your hands. You may squeeze it, or if you do hold it in your hands, brace it on a support stand like this rubber block. You can also use sandpaper, fine grit sandpaper, and get these edges cleaned up. Again, it's easier in the greenware state than it is in the fired state. Now I'm taking this round one here to refine these holes. I can even enlarge these holes with the drill if I find they're too small afterwards. But even though the round file is not big enough for the size hole, I just need the roundness of the edge to go in there, and you can just gently run it back and forth and clean up those lips. I'm also using the round one on the inside curves of the heart. Just get it nice and clean and refined. You can even sand the top with some sandpaper if it looks like it's a little rough and you want a nice shiny finish. So the same is true for this last little piece. And then you would either put it in a kiln to fire, and you would fire at 1472 degrees for about 30 minutes is the recommended time. But I do about 80% of my work with a torch. It's fast, it's easy. I love the instant gratification it offers me. And for those of you who don't have a kiln, it's just a nice, inexpensive, affordable alternative. So be sure to check out my video on torch firing metal clay and another video on how to hand finish it. So, thank you so much for joining me here today. Don't forget to turn all your friends on to how easy it is to work with metal clay, and by visiting firemountaingems.com, and share it on Pinterest, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.